PCR testing program in May. This will be open to schools K through 12 that are public and private, as well as public pre-K programming. We would like to use this time to provide schools the opportunity to learn more about what this program will look like, what are the components that it entails, and to kind of walk through a little bit of a day in the life of a school that is enrolled in this program. This program is optional for schools. It is not a requirement. It's really meant to provide schools with another tool to support in-person education and really to prevent the transmission of COVID-19 in the community of, in school communities. There are obviously lots of parts of this program that can be quite nuanced when you get down to the school or district level. The time today will not be focused on getting into every minute detail. It's really to provide a broad overview of the program, and so that schools can get a better understanding of how this program might work for them, or whether or not they're interested in enrolling in the program. So with that, I would like to introduce Anne Strickland and Isoka Viravagu, I hope I got that correct, from Ginkgo Bioworks. And this is a testing service provider that has been working in the state of Massachusetts, conducting and overseeing their pooled PCR testing program with great success. And they are really a content expert when it comes to pooled PCR testing in the school setting. And so we have invited them today to talk about how this program works and kind of provide an overview of what it would look like for a school that was interested in enrolling in the program. So with that, I'll hand it over.
Great, thanks, Sally. And as Sally so lovely introduced us, I'm Anne. I work with the testing service provider called Ginkgo, and we're just here to provide all of you folks just a general overview of what like a pooling program can look like at your school. So I am just going to share some slides here. Okay. Okay, so we've really identified that testing is really just such a great strategy to get everyone back into the community and as well as thriving in schools. There still is a long way, and especially with children not being eligible for the vaccine yet, we do know that testing is a super important strategy to get everyone back in school. I am also a registered nurse, so I do know how important this is for everyone, and hope that I can help support you throughout this program in that way as well. So pool testing was really identified at the national level as a way to bring schools back into the classroom and live as well. It's really the most practical solution to kind of get folks tested en masse. So I guess the first question is kind of what is classroom pooling? So this is specific to kind of the products that we provide for everyone. Sometimes you can hear about like different types of pooling, but we'll go over the type that will be practiced in the state of Maine. So we do what is called front-end pooling, which means that all the samples are collected in the front in the classroom with the students and pooled together in one tube. So we do not have any individual level samples because they're all put together at the start. Each pooled tube can hold between 5 to 25 swabs. This is the number of swabs that was validated in the lab test. So it has to be between 5 to 25 swabs. It is a molecular test. It is just a normal PCR test that we run at the lab, but just, again, it's not individual. We only get the results for all the swabs in each tube at once. This is different than what often you can hear about, which is lab pooling, where individual samples are collected and then compiled at the lab into one sample to be tested. So our product is a little bit different, and we do find that this is great in the school setting. It does provide just a layer of security that often makes families feel great, knowing that we don't have individual access to anyone's samples. So that's part of the reason we've decided to go with the front-end pooling, which is where all the swabs go into one tube at once. So basically what you'll get from us is everything you need to actually collect the samples and ship them. So tubes, swabs, instructions, training, onboarding, access to our website, as well as, of course, the lab processing and the data return, which also comes via the website. So everyone who's participating will get access to our website portal and be able to submit their tubes as well as return the results. Things that are a little bit more on the side of both the state and as well as each school is getting any PPE that you may feel is necessary for swabbing, supervision, as well as FedEx drop-off. We do use FedEx as our carrier to the lab. Everything gets shipped overnight, and those labels come in the packaging for you folks. The important thing for schools to be on top of is definitely communication with students and families, as well as obtaining consent forms. And those types of kind of on the ground decisions. So this is generally how it works. You'll kind of do onboarding and setup, get to test day, and you'll get the results. Again, this is all kind of managed in our online portal, and we'll take care of that when we get closer. So generally, these are the participants that we often refer to when we talk about pooling. These are parents and families who just have to provide consent. Often there's an administrator involved at the school level to kind of coordinate the whole testing program. Oftentimes students swab in the classroom, so teachers are just observers in the process. School nurses are often also a key integral player for anyone that may need assistance in collection, also just as a subject matter expert at each school and pooling, and as well, of course, the participants, which include students, administrators, teachers, anyone at school. This is just a little bit more tactical, so we'll skip over this slide for now. But this is just the brief process overview of test day. So every classroom or every pool that you're collecting will have a tube, and then all those folks that are going to be participating in that pool will swab themselves independently and then place them in the tube. And then the tube just gets packaged up in a box and shipped out to the lab. And as I said before, the results will get returned via the website. Sample collection is quite simple. We find that students as young as pre-K can usually do it themselves. Sometimes we'll have parents assist if they're quite young, or sometimes the school nurse if they need that as well. It's just a lower nasal swab, so just like a Q-tip in your nose. No different than what you would do at home if you needed to do that. And just swirl it around in both nostrils 4 times. So that's basically the collection process. Of course, we'll send all of you folks instructions and collections and lots of guidance on training and onboarding, which we'll leave for later down the line. But just wanted to reassure everyone that there's lots of support available, and we'll make the process as smooth as possible. So that's basically the overview of pooling. I think now might be a good time to take a few questions if we have any. So I see Paul Penna, if there's a positive test from one classroom, does that mean the entire classroom needs to quarantine regardless of distancing?
So I can answer that. No, it does not mean that. So the process that will be followed once you get your results back through the portal, you'll be able to identify which classroom is positive. From there, it will be up to the school to identify which students were in that pool. That's not information Ginkgo will have, so that will be at the school level. From there, the school would use a Binax Now rapid antigen test on each individual student in that classroom or that pooled classroom that was positive to identify the positive individual. The positive individual would be sent home on isolation, and the remaining students would continue in the classroom until the next following week when you do your next pool testing. If for any reason you did a whole round of Binax on those students and they were all negative, they would proceed to stay in the classroom. They would go home, and the following day, those same students would return to the classroom and they would have another round of antigen Binax Now testing. The goal of the testing is to identify positive individuals who are infectious and to keep as many students in the classroom as possible. Nancy?
Yes. Thank you. And I was only going to add the incidents that the testing companies who've been doing this, some of them since last fall, some of them have been doing them since January, has been extremely, extremely low. So this scenario that we're talking about where they're pool tested, retested, and tested again, that is not the norm. That is the huge exception. I just want to make sure that was clear. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next question from Susan. My school also runs a summer camp. Will this be available for camp?
Yes, our plan is to make this available to day camps. In other words, recreation camps that are often run in communities in partnership with schools or other sorts of community-based organizations. It will not be available to overnight camps or private camps. It will also be available to schools that offer summer school programming. So schools that are offering to students in-person educational support during the summer months, this program would remain in as an available tool for those schools.
Great. The next question from Catherine Grandin is when and how often? So we usually recommend that pool testing occurs every week as a great surveillance tool. So every week that the students are in class. What is the return time on the results? So usually we say at the end of the day, around 4 p.m. is when the clock will start, and we strive to return all results within 48 hours. Tammy Underwood, is this the same group every time being tested? So I can give some insight into how some other places have found it successful. Yes, it's often most effective if you can keep the pools as consistent as possible. And that way, you know, it's easier to keep track of who's in what pool, and it also becomes easier to react to pools when they do come back. You know, consistency is always helpful. That being said, for some places, there are different circumstances where they need to change the pools every so often, and then it would just become important to be able to have great offline capture of who's in what pool to be able to react to that well. Anything to add, Sally?
No, I think that's about right. I mean, I think we'd want to try to, probably for ease of running the program as well.
Yeah.
It's just easier to maintain the pools. You know, adding a student or taking out a student is one thing, but moving and shuffling students around into different pools each week is likely not going to be conducive to efficiency.
Just makes it a little bit more complicated, and we want it to run as smoothly as possible. So consistency always helps with that. Great. Okay, Jenny Lowell, what about students who are physically unable to swab themselves? Are teachers allowed to assist? Teachers are allowed to assist if they feel comfortable. This would also be a great place to pull in the school nurse if you have one available to you. Another strategy that we've found other schools have taken is sometimes if the parents are coming to drop off the student in the morning, just also to have the parent help them assist. And as well, the other option that we found that sometimes teachers feel comfortable with is a hand over hand with the student to help them swab themselves. What percentage of participation do you need in order for this to be accurate? I'm not sure, Karen, if you're kind of referring to like a community surveillance kind of rate, like participation rate or anything like that, but I'll tell you my policy, and then the folks can jump in. Is any testing is good testing. Any case that we catch is good. It's all worth it in the end. So really, I feel like any testing is good testing.
Yeah, and this is Ahsoka. I'll chime in with a little more detail from Concentric as well. We think about this pooled testing really as a safety net for the classroom and the school. And so the more students that participate, the tighter the mesh in that safety net is. And as there are fewer, then obviously the mesh gets bigger. But the fact that you're testing still provides that early warning radar where you're testing asymptomatic students. So they may have some amount of viral load, but they're not exhibiting any symptoms yet. So typically we see participation rates anywhere from 40%. Some schools and districts of the 900 that we're working with around the country are as high as 90%. But to Ann's point, testing is good, more is better. And then as an average, we're probably around 50% of students that opt in, 50 to 60%. And we have some very specific materials, community outreach, materials for parents that we can share to work to increase those consent rates and get the community comfortable with pooled testing and its benefit for the students, the school, and the community.
Great, thanks, Ahsoka. From Ms. Dara, do all students need to participate for this method to be useful and accurate? Thinking of those that refuse to consent to testing. Again, I think any testing is good testing. You know, if you're keeping your pools static from week to week, you're likely going to treat everyone in that classroom, whether or not they've tested or not, depending on what the result of that pool is, right? If you have a positive pool and there's one student who's been consistently in that classroom that's not consented to testing, you'd probably treat them just the same as everyone else who did participate in testing. I will say that oftentimes actually students want to test because they know it keeps them in school. And also, you know, kids just like to do what everyone else is doing sometimes. So if everyone in their classroom is testing, it looks like this fun activity. Students will sometimes even go home and ask parents, hey, what is this? How come I can't participate? And then sometimes they'll reach out to get information. That being said, our team has worked really hard to make sure that the consents are really family friendly. So we would encourage folks to kind of explore a little bit on their own and reach out for any questions, and encourage students, staff, administrators, nurses to encourage participation in their schools. Paul Penna, the issue of returning students to school are the distancing requirements. If we used weekly testing, will this modify any of the current DOE or CDC requirements?
Well, that's a great question. And it's actually something I just posed to Director Shaw yesterday. So at this time, I don't see the requirements changing, but I know Massachusetts and other states that have implemented this program have done some modifications. So that is something that certainly Maine may consider in the future. But I have flagged this for Director Shaw, and I believe this will be further, discussed further as we move forward with the program.
Great. Moving on, Miss Brittany, for clarification, we would not quarantine the exposed in the classroom with a positive case.
Correct. It's a little bit hard because it's very, it's kind of against everything that you've been told to do and been trained to do over the past year. But yes, the goal of this is to provide screening for students to identify positive cases. And with that, I'll let Nancy speak because she could probably speak better to the Department of Education side of it.
I guess what I'd like to help everybody understand is that by doing a PCR pool test, which is very sensitive and finding a viral load at a very low level, I can't say much below, but might be below transmissible level, and you remove that, and then you find them with an antigen test and remove them from this classroom, the science is saying that that person did not have enough time and enough viral load to share it widely in a classroom yet. So that's my understanding from reading everything I've been reading for the last 3 weeks. If that's not right, I want to be corrected, but that's how I understand it. Thank you.
And I can add some color to that from the work that we've done with schools. So that is correct, that the idea of asymptomatic testing is you're catching students with very much lower viral load than when they turn symptomatic. So there's a question, I think, a little bit later about, if the students are still running around for 48 hours before results come back, isn't that to the detriment of the program? But the reality is they're still asymptomatic. So during that time period, they are it's unlikely that they are transmitting because they're still masked, they're socially distanced, and there's sanitization going on in classrooms. So you keep them as contained and as safe as possible. And for a little bit of data for all the schools that are on, we've been doing this now for about 6 months across the country, from private schools as small as 50 students to large districts in the mid-Atlantic and in California that are almost 300,000 students. And in total, we're testing about 100,000 students, multiple 100,000 a month. The positive pool rate nationwide right now is hovering, it's about 1%. So 1 in 100 pools turn up a positive, and then using Binax now as the follow-on or the confirmatory test process catches the individual who's the positive within that pool about 80% of the time. So again, going back to the safety net analogy, you have these 2 layers of net, first being pool test that catches an individual pool, that's approximately 1%, and you should expect to see something similar, 1% or less in your schools and districts. And then from that, the ability to use the tools that the state has provided with the Binax now is quite effective in identifying that individual. So what Nancy was saying in terms of how this works to prevent contagion spreading, that's really the mechanism, is you're catching it very early before the individual can spread and transmit to others.
Great, thanks. Miss Angie, how would this work for schools that have a rotating schedule where the same classes only repeat every 2 days? What we've seen in other schools for groups that have like an A block and then a B block that come in Monday, Tuesday, and then the other block comes in Thursday, Friday, is just to test twice a week instead of once a week, so you can have as much student coverage as you need.
I think we just covered the next one from Laura, huh?
Great.
Mm-hmm.
So Miss Jamie, just to clarify, you said if there is a positive, only the positive student would go home. So all the other students could stay if negative. Does this mean if you are pool testing, you no longer have close contacts? I think this is a nuanced answer.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Sally.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think if you do the pooled PCR and you have a positive pool and you do the Binax now and you identify the individual and you remove the individual, what we are saying is that that individual student having been removed allows those other students who are in that classroom to remain in the classroom, and they'll just be in that next screening with the pooled PCR the following week. Does it stop contact tracing? I think that that's probably a good question in terms of what is the role for the individual that's removed and whether there's additional steps that need to be taken as it relates to the person that's been removed from the classroom. And I think that that's something that we will have to work through over the next few weeks as we launch this program to ensure that the standard operating procedure that schools currently follow aligns with this program and how we're going to treat close contacts and contact tracing.
Yep, and I think I can add that if the students are all appropriately socially distanced all day and as well as wearing their masks all day, they wouldn't qualify as a close contact per the current CDC guidelines. But it is, I think, as Sally pointed out, a bit of a nuanced answer and a nuanced question. Miss Julia, I think we've probably answered your question. Please just resubmit it in the chat if we have not. Okay, for testing accounts, Mrs. Sarah, the testing accounts for classrooms. But what about when students are together on the bus prior to testing or in sports?
I was just thinking about this too. I was writing notes on my, so I think that I was kind of thinking through the same question. I think that the question is about, you know, if someone is in a pool, they're tested and then that pool doesn't have to quarantine, but that pool is not the only interaction that that student has at school. They ride the bus, they're in the cafeteria, they're in sports and other places. So I think the question is about identifying close contacts outside of the pool. And I think, as Sally said just before, that I think that's going to take some work on our SOP, our standard operating procedure for when there's a positive case. So I don't think that we have an answer to that nuanced, that question yet.
And I just want to note too that the purpose of the pooled testing is not with an underlying thought that students maintain or stay in that one space with those students. It's really, the pooled PCR testing program is to allow schools a really easy, quick way to do weekly surveillance of all students in their school that participate in the program. The pool is really just the method in is how the samples are collected and how they're tested, and so that we can drill down. It doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, if they're in their homeroom classroom and that is where they're tested, that if they can't go to their science class and be with a different group of students, right? Because it doesn't mean that somehow the pools are compromised because the student goes to the science classroom, because the science classroom, those students will have been tested similarly in their homerooms. So the whole point of this is to get at the individuals, and the pool is really just the method to get to those individuals and identify them and then isolate them. And meanwhile, keeping the school functioning as close to normal as possible. I hope that also helps to clarify. Go ahead, Nancy.
So I just wanted to add that it probably, given what you just gave for an answer, you're still going to be looking at a student who's positive and looking at where they've been in the last 2 days and what kind of contact they may have had. So I know we're going to review it, and it's going to be some additions to the SOP, but I don't think this replaces close contacts.
And there was also part of the question was about sports, and we can add some more detail there. What many districts and schools are doing around the country that are using pooled testing, especially in the older grades, middle school, high school, is they're testing the groups as a cohort once a week. So let's say in high school, it would be their homeroom or first period. And then for sports, where students have even closer contact, often unmasked, and they are yelling and cheering in close proximity, they would test that sports team as well. So that is something that can be discussed and worked out, but we've enabled sports to come back in a more safe way with a known quantity of the sports team's status in many districts and schools as well. So that's kind of a hybrid approach where you're testing across cohorts, but it again tightens that safety net of knowing what our students' status of infection in your school community.
Great, thank you. So the next question, Ms. Nicole, for elementary students that are asymptomatic, rapid is supposedly not as accurate and they do not use assigned seating. So that seems to go against how we trace if a pool test was positive. Again, I think this is a bit of a nuanced question as well. You know, and I think what we all need to remember also is that this is all new for all of us. And sometimes there are these questions that just don't have a great answer. And we just kind of work the best that we possibly can to provide as much guidance as we can. So I think that's one important part. And then I think the second bit is maybe Ahsoka can speak to the accuracy of the Binax with the younger students.
Sure, and really Binax is more about viral load. So Binax is not really meant as a tool for catching asymptomatic infection. And that's where pooled testing comes in. And that's why there's 2 passes at testing using Binax. So first time would be to do follow-on testing immediately as soon as the school receives the results. If the results show all negative, then send the students home for 1 day, retest the next day. And what we are finding is with that second pass, we're getting in the high 90s of being able to catch any infection that was triggered by the positive pool. So even though the younger students, I see here, they don't have assigned seating, they are in a classroom together and they're mingling and mixing together. So that whole group is treated as a cohort.
Great, thank you. Ms. Michelle, can you give an approximate description of the responsibilities of the person collecting the vials, need for PPE, etc.? I think we can kind of get into more details as we move forward as this with the state program. Just briefly, however, we do find that most classrooms just collect in their classroom. And oftentimes, you know, the need for PPE can actually be quite low depending on comfort level and guidance. You know, you could, if students are swabbing in their seats, socially distanced by themselves, of course, that doesn't count as any kind of exposure. They can walk them up one by one, place them in the tube. The tube can be placed on also like another table that's distance away from everyone else, or by the door. So they really shouldn't be coming. There's no need for students to come into more than 6 feet into contact with either the teacher or the nurse or any other observer. And they should be able to do it all independently. And again, we've seen students quite as young as down to pre-K and kindergarten who are able to do this independently. So we found the need for things like PPE actually quite low.
And I'm dropping into the chat a brief video, just a 2-minute video of pool testing in action in a Massachusetts middle school. I think it's instructive because instead of just hearing about what this is like, you can view this and you'll get to see what it's like, what the role of the teacher, a school nurse, if available, the student, the principal, even the superintendent are. So you can watch that at your convenience. And we have plenty of other materials to share too as we progress in the program.
Thanks, Ahsoka. Miss Jessie, what happens to students without consent with a positive case? Do they quarantine anyways? I think maybe Sally will have some insight onto what the policies may be. More locally, I will say that most of the time, if a pool comes back, if that's students in that classroom, they're treated as if they tested. So they would be treated as if they were positive and need to decide what to do after that.
I apologize. I'm deep in the chat here and I'm feeling a little, I'm trying to respond to some people and answer another question. So I don't know.
Worries.
Okay.
We'll go to the next question. Mr. Eric, pool testing makes sense for K to 5 or even K through 8. How does it work with 9 to 12 where cohorts are fluid? Again, this is also a great question. You know, that you're not alone. This is a question we've heard from a lot of high schools that kind of roam around school a little bit. And I think, you know, again, the answer can be nuanced a little bit. But, you know, I think testing still does make sense in this population. If you're testing, you know, homeroom A and that comes back positive, you'll be able to follow up with those individuals with the Binax Now test to kind of identify the individual. So it's still very worthwhile in that case. Miss Christie, are parents or insurance charged for this service? Nope. This is being provided by the state of Maine and the federal government at no charge to families or schools. Ms. Sharon, are you testing the whole school population weekly, including the teacher in each classroom? We encourage for folks to test whoever they'd like to test. Lots of schools do include the teachers in the pools, especially if we're talking about K through 8, where the pools are a little bit more static. Most schools, I would say, include the teacher. Lots of schools have taken the opportunity to really test as many people as they possibly can. So this can often include people who don't actually normally have a homeroom, like art teachers, gym teachers, custodial staff, as well as administration. You know, I think the policy is as many people as you can test, the better.
And I think that can be a good example for the students as well, to have the teachers be part of their pool.
Yes, it's a great point. Ms. Meredith, I can see us having to do more Binax testing with students with this program. Is there any chance non-nurse staff will be able to administer the Binax tests?
Yes.
Yes, if a person can self-swab, sorry, Sally, I'm telling you.
Go for it, Emily.
If a person can self-swab, then yes, please use, you can have other people trained who conduct the test. So hold the card, put the reagent on. It does not have to be a nurse that does that. If it's someone actually needs some person to do the swabbing, then that should be a healthcare person in the school.
Thank you. Ms. Sharon, are these shipped to Boston and then the clock starts when they arrive at Ginkgo? We're still kind of ironing out the final details for this, and I'm sure they will be shared once these have been totally ironed out.
But I can provide some high-level perspective on that. So the idea is initially these samples are going to a lab in Massachusetts. So if you think about turnaround time, overnight shipping kind of is 1 day, and then lab testing is 1 day. And so that's where the 48 hours come from. As volume increases, we would be looking at a local Maine lab, probably in the Portland area, most likely. So the ability to further compress turnaround time, and in general, our lab turnaround time is well within 24 hours. So just give you some perspective of the components that go into total turnaround time. And what we'll be working towards is make this all a within the boundaries of Maine program: sample collection, transport, testing, and results.
I will also say that our lab network knows how important this is to everyone, and really also feels the mission to get everyone's tests back. And we have not had many people feel uncomfortable with the turnaround time that we've provided. We have lots of happy schools. Okay, Ms. Flora, I believe we already answered your question, but please feel free to post it again if not. Travis, is there a cost? No. Ms. Sharon, how reliable has the antigen test been for follow-up if the child is not symptomatic? This is a great question. I don't know, Sally, if you want to take that one.
So I think just kind of jumping off of what we've kind of touched upon already, what we have found is that in states that have used this approach for testing positive pools, I think Ahsoka kind of said it's 8 out of 10 for the first round. And then if you are all negative and you come back and test again, it's upwards of over 90% effective at securing that positive case. I think one thing we know about antigen testing is that they work well right at that moment when the viral load is climbing. And that is often when they can pick up the virus, which is often why the state of Maine has really emphasized antigen testing being used serially or on regular intervals. Because when you do that, you're more apt to catch that individual right at the moment that viral load is kind of climbing up that hill, so to speak, where the PCR catches it at such a low level, when they may not even, they're not symptomatic, and frankly, they're not even potentially infectious yet. I mean, that's how little of the RNA is needed on a PCR. So I think the key to this is that the Binax now is an effective tool. Certainly, we know it does a pretty good job finding that individual first round, and certainly when we apply it in a serial manner to that same pool, its efficacy of picking up that positive individual only increases with each time you do the repeat testing. So that is the approach that the state of Maine is adopting, because we feel fairly confident that it will pick up the positive case. That being said, we're not ruling out potential for individual PCR testing, and that is something that we are considering as kind of a last kind of wall of protection, so to speak. But we haven't identified when that would be triggered. It might be that we do a third round of Binax Now testing. So we're kind of still looking at the fine details of what kind of the algorithm would look like as you go through your processes following a positive pool.
Great, thanks, Sally.
Yep.
We've got lots of questions and not a lot of time, so I'm going to try to boogie through a few of them. What model has been effective and when the pool testing should be done? Beginning of the week. We usually just say try to test on as few days as possible, so you kind of have the fewest days that you need to react to any pools if you have any positive pools. Beginning of the week is often effective because that way students are back in school to get their Binax Now. Sometimes we find schools want to manage it on the weekends. So they would test on a Thursday and get results on a Saturday, which can actually be challenging in some cases or easier in some cases. So it would really be up to kind of the local management to decide how you'd want to test those at what part of the week. Mr. Travis, we're a small school, 330 kids. Will we be able to test 100% of the kids a week? Yes, there's no capacity limits. We're happy to run as many tests as you can send us. Miss Melissa, would it be one consent form that would cover both pool testing and then follow-up Binax if needed for the year? Yes, it is one consent that covers both types of testing. Miss Jessie, if a student tests positive, once they complete their isolation, would they then be exempt from testing? I can tell you what our policy is, and then maybe Sally, if you have something different, you can chime in as well. So our company recommends a 90-day moratorium to return to the pool testing to prevent any false positives in any pools going forward.
And that's in alignment with the Maine CDC.
Perfect. Ms. Christina, if a positive is identified, how is privacy managed? This is also a good question. Our website is totally HIPAA compliant. And we do take privacy very seriously, and when we get further down the line, I'm sure we'll share out our consents and websites and things like that, so you can have more opportunity to look over the privacy concerns of testing. Miss Amy, would the students who refuse or parents refuse to be tested if their cohort is pool tested, would that person then quarantine for a close contact? I think we've covered this already. Same with Miss Beverly, if a teacher tested, yes, they can test in the classroom if they choose. Ms. Darcy, how often has this been a successful approach to catching positive cases in schools? I think Ahsoka might have the most close knowledge to answer that question.
Yeah, and as I shared earlier, in general, what positive pools turn up 1% of the time, roughly across the entire nation. And so the big thing that it's preventing is outbreaks. So instead of it spreading and you having to send multiple classrooms home, the idea is catching this early, isolating, doing follow-up testing, and then extracting the individual out. So what we've seen overall is that we look at the metric of keeping kids in school, and it's been able to kind of increase by about 50% in total by having this type of process in place where you don't have a kid who's triggered, they have a positive test, and then because there's really no way to follow up, you're through contact tracing, sending entire grades home, entire classrooms home, and entire sports organization home. So I hope that answers the question, but in terms of kind of the math behind it, we're looking at how do we enable more kids to stay within classroom learning and not have that be disrupted.
Thanks. Ms. Catherine, are there concerns as to those who do not consent and those who do, discrimination, and now we know who is positive? I hope not. I think, this would really be kind of managed locally on how to maintain privacy and respect for everyone who's being tested and if anyone does come back positive. I think I can share that in other schools, students have kept it quite private. They don't share with the rest of the school community who's tested positive and who has not tested positive. But it really is, I think a local management can prevent these types of issues from appearing. Mr. Dale, what's the average amount of time it takes to test a class of 25? This can vary depending on the age. I think if we're talking about older students, it could be just quite a few minutes to be able to test all 25 students. If we're talking about younger students, sometimes it will take just a few extra minutes than that. But I would say probably the average is around 3 to 5 minutes for a classroom, maybe a little bit above that if they're quite young. Ms. Sharon, I think we addressed your question already.
I'd just like to just also note, because I keep trying to find a spot to bring it up, but I do want to let participants on the call know that the state of Maine is also prepared through the partnership with Ginkgo to provide on-site support to schools that need it. So what this could look like could be actual on-site support that is clinical. So for actual physical collection of samples specifically for individuals or students that are quite young, as Anne kind of noted. We're also, the state of Maine is also supporting any on-site support that is needed for the administrative portion of the program. So it could be as much as entering in information and calling families and documentation. And so the state of Maine will be providing this support for schools that need it. And again, it's not a support that will be transferred. The cost of the support will not be transferred onto the schools. It is a fully funded support by the state of Maine and the federal government. So I did just want to note that for schools.
Thanks, Sally. I think we'll try to just do a couple more questions and then wrap it up with any closing comments if we have any, just to be respectful of everyone's time. I think, what is the recommendation for schools that are not doing rapid antigen tests in the schools?
So my recommendation is if you are currently not using Binax Now in your school and you are interested in enrolling in this program and think it's something you'd like to do, I think the first step for that school is to begin the process of getting familiar with Binax Now. The first step would be applying for a CLIA waiver and reviewing the school-based guidance for Binax Now, which kind of outlines all the things that a school would need to do to use Binax Now, which is securing the CLIA waiver, completing the online training, ordering the tests, and then setting up an account through REDCap, which is an online portal where you can report test results to the Maine CDC. This program is still open to any schools interested, and there is information posted on the DOE website if there are schools that are interested in taking that step.
Great. Thanks, Sally. We only have a couple minutes left. And I think we've got some pretty good action answering some of the questions in the chat. So I think we'll just move to closing off the meeting, and we will take note of the questions in the chat and try to ensure that they are answered for everyone. Okay. So thank you very much for joining us and learning about pooled testing. Again, you know, we really admire everyone's effort and time to join us. We know everyone's lives are busy, and the dedication to learning more and bringing pooled testing to the community to keep everyone safe. So thank you very much, and you'll be sure to hear more about pooled testing and how it's going to work in the state of Maine.
Sally, could you just speak to next steps for everyone on the line, just so they know what to expect from the state next, please?
Sure. So we'll be hosting another informational webinar on Thursday, this Thursday from 3 to 4 p.m. It will be the same format as today. It's for other folks that maybe couldn't get on today. This is being recorded and will be available as well for viewing. The next steps is we are working very rapidly to develop all the tools and guidance that will be needed for schools, including a needs assessment, which we are hoping to provide to schools in the next few days. The needs assessment is really just kind of a grid that a school could go through. It's a step-by-step grid that kind of walks you through what a school would need to identify or determine in terms of readiness and steps they can take if they're interested in enrolling in the program. We're also hoping to have the enrollment form for this program live. Certainly, we're hoping for Friday, but it may be as early as Monday of next week. And what we are hoping is that schools that are interested after the informational webinar in enrolling in the program will be able to do so as early as Monday of next week. And from there, it will be the process of connecting the school with Ginkgo and then beginning the onboarding process. So those are kind of the next steps from our standpoint. Nancy, did you have something to add?
No, thank you everybody for attending today. And if you have more follow-up questions, I'm certainly available if you want to send me an email. And if it's something I can't answer and I need to push to other folks, I will. I'm happy to, or have any more discussion. I know this was really high level today, and that's intended to be that way because there's going to be a lot of nuances. There's going to be a lot of individual schools with individual questions. How do I make this work in my school? And that's why the needs assessment is kind of a good tool to just help you walk through how is this going to work in my school and what do I need to make it work. So thank you everybody for attending.
Thank you very much.
Everyone. Have a great afternoon.